A Great Argead Saga ALEXEIN, Alexander the Great. Volume 1, Telesias, The War Dance. By Macedonian. A new episode every single day. Episode 46, Architecture of the Pack. The small map room, Royal Palace, Pella, Twilight. The small, cedar-lined map room, adjacent to the royal audience hall of Pella, smelled of damp wool, spilled ink, and the sharp iron stench of recent slaughter. Outside, the low, anxious murmur of the Macedonian court rattled against the heavy oak doors like wind before a storm. Pelopidas stood by the narrow stone window, his massive chest still heaving slightly under his bronze cuirass. Across from him, Charon sat leaning against a heavy iron-bound chest, his fingers restlessly tracing the bronze pommel of his short sword. "The Queen Mother has swallowed the poison," Pelopidas rasped, his voice a low rumble. "Perdiccas is signing the decree. Their elite companion cavalry, 100 of their finest horsemen, will march south within the week to safeguard our rear flank in the Boeotian League." "A striking deal," Charon murmured, his eyes narrowing in the dim lamplight. "We have effectively bled their frontier defense white to reinforce our own front line." "And the price?" "The youngest prince. 14-year-old Philip goes to Thebes as our primary political hostage." Pelopidas turned away from the window, his expression grim. "But it is not enough, Charon. The treaty is a temporary knot. We need a permanent anchor." Charon straightened, his focus shifting. "You want more than the prince." "I watched that boy in the hall just now," Pelopidas said, his baritone dropping into a chillingly flat resonance. "He does not look at our spears with the terror of a captive child. He looks at them with a cold, terrifyingly sharp intellect. He's a sponge, Charon. He's already dissecting our presence, copying our posture, and reverse engineering our authority in his mind. If we bring only Philip to the Cadmea, we are simply training a solitary predator." "Then let him rot in a cell," Charon countered smoothly. "Why risk his education?" "Because a broken Macedonia is useless to us, and a single king cannot move a mountain," Pelopidas explained, stepping heavily toward the central map table. "Look at this palace. It is a viper's nest of corruption. The native barons are feral dogs tearing at each other's throats, completely blind to geopolitical maneuvers. If Philip returns here in a few years with only his own genius, he will be assassinated within a winter. A leader without an ecosystem is just a corpse waiting for a blade." Pelopidas slammed his heavy fist onto the table, right over the coordinate of Pella. "Before the ink dries on this treaty, Thebes must demand a new parameter. We require 100 of the highest Macedonian noble boys, the entire younger generation of their aristocracy, to accompany Philip to the south." Charon's brow twitched upward as the sheer scale of the calculation hit him. 100. "The barons will call it an abduction. Let them call it what they want. They have no army left to stop us," Pelopidas rumbled, a predatory smile breaking through his weathered features. "Think of the mechanics, Charon. We do not treat these boys as common prisoners. We place them in our academies, Scali alongside Philip. They will eat at the same mess tables, sweat in the same training pits, and bleed under the same iron discipline of our instructors." "A royal page system," Charon mused, catching the vision. "You aren't just taking hostages. You are building him a cabinet." "Exactly. Exactly on the same page," Pelopidas nodded intensely. "If we only train the prince, we accomplish nothing. When he returns to rebuild this shattered kingdom from within, he cannot waste years explaining the geometry of a flanking maneuver, or the nuances of statecraft to illiterate warlords. He needs colleagues. He needs an elite officer corps who understand his shorthand because they shared the same mud in Thebes." Charon rose slowly, looking down at the map of the fractured northern state. "It is a staggering gamble, Pelopidas. If these boys absorb our Theban doctrine and remain loyal to our shadow, we forge an unbreakable puppet state to guard our northern border forever. But if they don't, we will have systematically engineered and instructed our own executioners," Pelopidas finished, his voice dropping into a low, whispering friction. "We are giving a young wolf the teeth, the training, and the pack he needs to hunt. But to dictate the future of Greece, Charon, one must be willing to forge the absolute weapon, even if it knows exactly how to turn inward." The massive oak doors swung open with a heavy, concussive groan, and the transition from the secluded strategy room back into the public theater of the Grand Council chamber was seamless, freezing, and absolute. Inside the main hall of Pella, the atmosphere had grown suffocatingly thick. A stagnant, toxic draft of damp wool garments, spilled vinegar ink, and the unmistakable stale iron stench of recent slaughter that no amount of burning frankincense could mask. Outside, beyond the narrow slit windows, the low, anxious murmur of the gathering Macedonian court rattled against the perimeter doors like a rising squall before a catastrophic mountain storm. General Pelopidas strode directly to the center of the hall, his massive chest still heaving with a rhythmic, imposing friction beneath his dark, sweat-stained bronze cuirass. The unrolled leather treaty lay across the central table, its stiff edges curling defiantly under the dead weight of two black bronze inkwells. Seated upon the preposterously massive ebony throne, 17-year-old King Perdiccas III sat entirely frozen. His knuckles were clamped so tightly around the carved armrests that the skin was translucent, his youthful face a pale, bloodless mask of pure exhaustion. Flanking the boy king like defensive stone towers stood Regent Ptolemy of Aloros and the young, volatile highland predator, General Attalus. Pelopidas did not look at the boy. He leaned his massive bulk forward, driving the full momentum of his shadow across the table as he slammed his heavy, scarred palms flat upon the cartographic lines of Macedonia. The baseline parameters are established, Pelopidas spoke, his baritone instantly dropping into a cavernous resonance that caused the roof timbers overhead to hum with vibration. Prince Philip departs for the south immediately as our primary political guarantee. Furthermore, the Crown of Macedonia will deploy an elite vanguard of 100 full-blooded companion cavalry to operate as an auxiliary force under my direct command, permanently safeguarding the rear flank of the Boeotian League. Ptolemy let out a slow, meticulously controlled breath through his nose, his rings clicking sharply against the gold leaf pommel of his sword as he forced his features into an expression of magnanimous compromise. 100 horsemen is a cheap extortion, Ptolemy calculated rapidly behind his hooded eyes, his internal pulse steadying. Let the southern wolf take the highland cavalry. It thins the loyalist factions inside my own barracks. It leaves the throne more vulnerable to my hand. A bitter pill, General, Ptolemy smoothed, his voice carrying the oily, practiced equilibrium of a seasoned usurper. But for the sake of regional equilibrium and to preserve the brotherhood between our states, we accept the matrix. The line will march. I am not finished, Regent, Pelopidas cut in, his slate gray eyes narrowing into clinical, predatory slits as he systematically tightened the political vice. He did not blink. He did not offer a diplomatic pause. There is a final, non-negotiable condition required to immunize this contract against future treason. Thebes demands that 100 of the highest-born Macedonian noble boys, the direct firstborn heirs of your western and northern frontier barons, be delivered to the Cadmea alongside Prince Philip. 100? Ptolemy gasped. The words caught violently in his throat, and his artificial courtly smile instantly shattered like thin ice. He recoiled 2 full steps as if struck across the jaw by a shield boss, the blood surging up from his collar until his pale features flushed a deep mottled crimson. 100 firstborn heirs? Ptolemy's mind screamed in sudden, agonizing panic, the entire architecture of his regency destabilizing in a single second. He isn't just taking hostages, he's seizing the leash to every single warlord in the high country. If those boys are in Thebes, the barons will never back my crown. They will obey whatever puppet Boeotia sends back. Is 100 cavalry not enough? Attalus roared. The young general exploded out of the shadows of the columns, stepping forward so violently that his heavy bronze grease guards clanked like weapons against the marble flagstones. His right palm flew to the hilt of his broadsword, the leather scabbard twisting as his eyes went wild with an animalistic, primitive fury. And now 100 of our own noble children as common hostages. Attalus hissed, his breath hot, his torso leaning so far across the table that his breastplate nearly brushed the Theban's iron fittings. You are not stabilizing this house, Pelopidas. You are systematically castrating it. You are stripping away our future, our bloodlines, our very marrow before our eyes. This is not an alliance, this is the total, unconditional submission of Macedonia to the shadow of the Cadmea. Beside the ebony throne, Queen Mother Eurydice let out a sharp, ragged gasp that pierced the suffocating tension of the hall. She pressed a trembling, pale hand to her collarbone, her head bowing forward as she began to weep. Her shoulders shook violently beneath the heavy, suffocating folds of her dark Macedonian mourning veil, drawing every eye away from the map table and onto her shattered, royal silhouette. 100 noble boys, she sobbed, her voice a fragile, broken thread that seemed to dissolve into the damp limestone corners of the cavernous hall. Our sons, our very blood, bartered away into the south. To Ptolemy and Attalus, it was a flawless performance, the predictable, pathetic breakdown of a grieving mother who had already lost her oldest son to the riverbed, and was now watching her youngest child and the future of her court being dragged away into exile. But beneath the dark perimeter of that heavy veil, Eurydice's eyes were entirely dry. They burned with a sudden white-hot surge of absolute predatory clarity. He isn't breaking my son, her mind spun, her heart hammering against her ribs with an erratic, ecstatic rhythm, while she forced another shuddering sob from her throat. He isn't punishing us. By the gods. Pelopidas is giving him an army. Until this precise micro-negative second, her solitary focus had been a mother's desperate strategy for raw survival. Sending 14-year-old Philip to the south simply to extract his flesh from the immediate viper's nest of Pella, keeping him safe from Ptolemy's nocturnal assassins, while his intellect was forged under the clinical discipline of the Theban state. But she had known, with a cold, terrifying certainty, that Philip alone could do nothing upon his return. He came back to Macedonia as a solitary, hyper-educated exile. The illiterate highland warlords and corrupt barons would simply swallow him alive before the winter thaws. But 100 noble boys changed the mathematical geometry of the entire world. Pelopidas was not orchestrating an abduction. He was unconsciously creating an ecosystem. By demanding the firstborn heirs of every major frontier baron, the Theban Titan was ensuring that the entire future leadership class of Macedonia would sleep in the same barracks, eat at the same mess tables, and sweat in the same brutal training pits as her son. They would absorb the exact same tactical systems, master the same advanced geometry of the oblique phalanx, and return to Pella not as a fractured warring collection of rival clans, but as a unified, hyper-calibrated machine. Pelopidas was looking into the distance, offering her son a royal page system, an elite cabinet N, a hardened officer corps, who would speak Philip's tactical shorthand and help him re-engineer Macedonia from the marrow up. Overwhelmed by the sheer geostrategic generosity of the unsuspecting Theban, Eurydice masterfully channeled her rush of maternal gratitude into her theatrical tears, letting her voice tremble with a perfectly engineered despair. "We must obey the general's request," Regent Eurydice whimpered, looking up from beneath the margin of her veil, her eyes glistening with false moisture as she drove the knife directly into Ptolemy's political ribs. "Look at our shattered gates. Look at our bleeding borders. Do we have any choice left to us, Regent? If the great hall of Thebes demands our children to secure our protection, we must bend." "But 100 boys, Eurydice," Ptolemy hissed, spinning on his heel toward her, his artificial composure completely slipping as grease-fat sweat beaded along his hairline. His fingers twitched frantically against his sword hilt. If those boys learned to look at Philip as their commander in the south, his mind raced in a panic. "My regency is a phantom. The moment they return, the barons will follow him, not me. They will be entirely brainwashed by Theban ideology. They will learn to think like Southerners, to fight like Southerners. They are Macedonian. If we surrender them, we lose our pride, our heritage, our very identity to the Cadmea." Attalus slammed his heavy fist onto the cedar table, causing the inkwells to rattle violently against the maps, his face twisted into a furious animalistic sneer. "I will not see our sons turned into soft, submissive puppets for the Boeotian League. We will fight them in the passes before we hand over the cradle of our clans." Pelopidas did not flinch from the young Highland general's wrath. He stood completely immovable, an iron fortress of absolute authority in the center of the room, his hand resting casually on his sword pommel. "This parameter is for the structural security of us all, Regent, and for the preservation of your very lives," Pelopidas countered, his baritone slicing through their panic with cold military logic. "A house permanently divided against itself cannot survive the next Illyrian advance. Thebes does not seek puppets, we merely provide the iron framework for order." Eurydice stepped forward, her movements slow, fragile, and deliberately weighed down by her feigned grief. She wiped her face with the edge of her dark veil, offering Pelopidas a weak, submissive smile that perfectly projected the image of a broken woman. But as her eyes locked onto the Theban general's slate-gray pupils, she allowed a razor-sharp glint of absolute lethal understanding to flash beneath her lashes, a silent, sovereign signal hinting that she had seen through his magnificent calculation to the very bottom, and that she accepted the terms of the forge. "Let me negotiate the specific logistics with General Pelopidas," the Queen Mother murmured softly, her tone laced with a tragic, submissive weariness that left Ptolemy entirely blind to the trap closing around his throat. "Leave us for a brief moment, Regent. Let a defeated mother speak directly to the man who holds the absolute fate of our children." The clinic fell heavier, the air thick and stagnant, as if the room itself were holding its breath. The rhythmic scraping of pestles, usually a source of comfort, now sounded like the sharpening of blades. Menander approached the herb-drying racks, his movements fluid, his presence cutting through the dimness like a blade-like shadow. "The financier is rallying," Menander said, his voice a low, modulated hum that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of Lysandra's bones. "The miracle has taken hold. He's already clamoring for the next infusion of laser." Lysandra didn't look up from her mortar, though her pestle paused mid-stroke. "He's addicted," she thought, the realization settling like lead in her stomach. Not to the medicine, but to the promise of his own permanence. Menander hasn't just cured him. He's hooked him into a cycle of fear and relief that will never truly end. "It worked then?" she asked aloud, her voice tight. "The theatrics and the resin." "At this point, yes," Menander conceded, leaning against a weathered stone pillar. "He is recovering. But his hunger for the remedy, it is becoming a tether." Lysandra looked up, her expression a mask of professional indignation. "That is impossible. The humors do not realign in a mere handful of days. True restoration of the vessel requires weeks, 3 months, at a minimum, to settle the internal fire. He's merely feeling the initial erratic stimulation of the plant. It is a surface-level response, a frantic twitch of a dying nervous system." Menander's eyes glinted with a cold, calculating amusement. "Slow but deliberate, then. The longer the process, the better for him and for us. A damned soul requires time to be scrubbed clean." "The mind is a treacherous beast, Lysandra. Quick turns lead to quick reversals. Prolong his recovery. Let him languish in the agonizing anticipation of the next dose. And prepare yourself, we have another appointment." Lysandra stopped her work, the pungent, earthy scent of dried silphium clinging to her fingers. "Another? He isn't stopping. Was the financier not enough? You have the grain ships, the kitchens, the cooks? Surely that is sufficient to sustain the tunnels?" "It is all but assembled," Menander replied, his tone dismissive of the material gain. "We begin deliveries in a few days, warm, nutritionally dense meals, thrice daily." "But it is not just about the stomach, Lysandra. Do we still need more gold?" she asked, her voice tight. "For what purpose? How much more can the desperate consume?" Menander stepped into her space, his shadow engulfing her. "Because there are so many, Lysandra. The wounded, the diseased, their gold is a sickness that needs to be cleansed. It needs to be enlightened. We are gathering the resources to mold them into servants of Isis. We are salvaging the wreckage of society to build something far more durable." "Oh, I see," Lysandra thought, a chill snaking down her spine. "He isn't building a sanctuary, he's building an army of the desperate. Every coin he extracts from the wealthy is merely a link in a chain he is wrapping around the necks of the poor, binding them to his vision." "This is your time of ascension," Menander continued, gesturing vaguely toward the city beyond the walls. "From here, we rise into the top lines of the geopolitical arena. Look at them, healer. People carry unhealthy minds steeped in greed. It invites the disease into the intellect first, darkening the soul, in Athens and everywhere else." Lysandra turned back to her work, her eyes fixed on the gray stone of the mortar. "Am I truly just a healer anymore?" she wondered, the thought bitter on her tongue, metallic and sharp. "I'm not only saving lives or purging the rot of the body. I'm climbing a ladder built on the broken backs of the city, and the higher I ascend, the less I recognize the woman who began this work." She looked toward the door, where the golden light of Athens cast long, mocking shadows across the threshold. "They talk of philosophy, art, and culture," she murmured, her voice laced with a newfound dangerous irony. "They live like gods at the top of the chain. while the citizens of Athens, the sons and daughters of Athena and Poseidon, are suppressed, controlled. They kill themselves to earn the money that keeps the rich in silk, fueling their own endless suffering. And here we are, she realized, a cold crystalline resolve settling in her chest, using that same suffering to carve our own place in the heavens. Yes, Menander whispered, his voice a low, chilling caress that seemed to vibrate against the very architecture of the clinic. He stepped closer, reading the flicker of her intent with a predator's precision. And it is the only way to ensure the light actually reaches the dark. Lysandra stood, her posture shifting from the rigid stance of a physician to the calculated grace of a schemer. She turned from the mortar, her eyes dark with a new, dangerous resolve. Instead of us being fetched like common servants to their gilded cages, let them come here, she said, her voice dropping into a register of cold, steel-edged authority. Let them be laid in the tunnels among the others. Let them see the horror, the nightmares they helped weave, the reality they've spent their lives abandoning. She began to pace, the hem of her chiton sweeping over the dust-caked floor. Let their own servants serve them in the filth. Let the masters and the menials share the same damp, wretched air. If these house-dwellers are to be cleansed, their servants must see the reality as well. It will empower them. It will make them part of the movement. It saves us the time of traveling, and it forces these pampered elite to face the consequences of their convenience. If they need discipline, if they are to be obedient to your goddess, let them learn it where the air is thick with mortality. Menander's expression softened into a look of profound, terrifying approval. He inclined his head, a silent benediction. Yes, indeed. This is only the beginning. We shall conquer this dark horizon and drive this movement forward. The rot of the soul is everywhere, not just here in Athens, but across all of Hellas. The world is a sickened vessel, Lysandra. It needs to be purged, cured, and reshaped into the ideal kingdom. Our gods and goddesses will lead us to a true, enduring prosperity. To that end, I shall employ the city's little birds, the sharp-eyed mice that run through the gutters, to sniff out the targets who hide in the shadow of their own gold. Lysandra allowed a smile to touch her lips, though it was a brittle, sharp thing. Your tiny servants? Your orphans? She imagined the street urchins, the invisible witnesses of the city, trailing the corrupt elites through the winding alleys of the Agora. She felt a surge of cold, calculated power. It is not necessary for them to scout, Menander. I know exactly where the most desperate of them are. Menander's gaze sharpened, his interest piqued. You have your own intelligence network, Lysandra? The houses of pleasure, she murmured, her voice silk over razor blades. Menander's eyes brightened, a spark of dark delight dancing in his pupils. We shall need more than just silphium, Lysandra continued, the plans unfurling in her mind like a poisonous bloom. I need opium, potent sedatives, and a variety of refined aphrodisiacs. She smiled, and the expression was entirely devoid of warmth, a devilish, transformative grin. It seems you have your own agenda for these ailing rich, Menander noted, his voice amused. I have the ability to craft the ultimate duality for them, she replied, her inner thoughts racing with a physician's cold, analytical precision. I will pull them apart until they are nothing but nerve endings and terror, she thought. And then, when they are shattered, I will be the only one who can offer them the glue. I will induce a state of bottomless fear, a frantic waking dream of confusion. And in that same breath, I will offer them ultimate salvation, the feeling of being embraced by an undeniable, godly intervention. They will believe they are being touched by the divine. They will beg to see the light, and I will be the one who finally turns the lamp. She looked at her hands, the hands that had once stitched wounds and set bones. Now they were instruments of a different sort of surgery, one that peeled away the ego to reveal the shivering, submissive marrow underneath. They think they are buying health, she mused, the iron of her resolve hardening. They have no idea they are buying their own extinction. High above the jagged northern ridge, where the wind carried the sharp, biting scent of impending winter, the Illyrian encampment clung to the mountainside like a predator watching its prey. King Perdiccas, his face a map of scars and hard-won campaigns, stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the lush, emerald expanse of the Macedonian frontier below. Beside him stood his son, Cletus, a man of 45 years with the steady, lethal calm of an experienced commander, and his grandchildren. The restless 18-year-old Perdiccas II and 15-year-old Audata, whose eyes held a flicker of impatience that matched the restless shifting of the horses behind them. Argead exhaled a long, frustrated breath, the vapor swirling into the biting air. "I'm bored, grandfather," she said, her voice cutting through the silence of the ridge. "We've been chilling here for days, watching these Macedonian fields, counting their crops while we sit on our hands. Are we meant to be warriors or shepherds?" King Perdiccas didn't turn. His gaze remained locked on the horizon, his hand resting heavily on the hilt of his iron sword. Patience, he thought, the word a rhythmic pulse against the frantic heartbeat of the youth around him. They see land and gold, but they do not see the invisible threads of power that pull the world apart. "Now is not the time to move," Perdiccas replied, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "The Thebans are nearby, watching us with the religious fervor of hounds. If we descend now, we feed their vanguards. Harassing them is a temporal pleasure, a necessary diversion perhaps, but it is a gamble with lives I have sworn to preserve." He gestured toward the dense forest to the east. "If the bloodlust is truly that strong, perhaps we should venture into the wilder lands. Hunt something that fights back." Cleitus stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the maps of the southern valleys. Why settle for wild beasts when the borders of men are so porous? If Macedonia is too closely watched, what of Epirus? We have been testing their lines for months and they are brittle. He speaks with the cold clarity of a tactician, Perdiccas noted internally, a flicker of grim pride warming his chest. He knows that a kingdom is only as strong as its weakest brother. "The Macedonians are fracturing from within," Cleitus continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "And Epirus is no better. Their throne is a seat of discord, two royal brothers, one aged and clinging to power, the other young and eager to usurp it. They are so busy trying to strangle one another that their frontiers are left to rot, unguarded and ripe." Perdiccas II's eyes brightened, a predatory hunger lighting his young face. He stepped up to his grandfather's side, his hand gripping the pommel of his own dagger. "We must go there, grandfather? The mountains here are cold, and the waiting is a slow death. Let us ride for Epirus. Teach us the true way, show us how to move like the shadow, how to strike like the Illyrians." Perdiccas looked at his grandson, seeing his own younger self reflected in that impatient, fiery gaze. "They think it is just a game of steel and speed," he mused, watching the horizon. "They do not yet understand that the true Illyrian path is not just in the killing, but in the knowing of when to hold the blade back until the world is begging for it to fall." "You want to be Illyrian," Perdiccas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low pitch. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the three of them, the son who was his iron, the grandson who was his fire, and the granddaughter who was his hidden blade. To be Illyrian is to be the storm, and a storm does not strike until the air is heavy enough to break the earth. He felt the weight of the crown, not as a symbol of glory, but as a burden of survival. Let them believe it is about adventure, he thought, a secret, iron-willed resolve hardening in his heart. "I will show them the art of the harvest. We will not just raid, we will dismantle their borders until the brothers in Epirus have nothing left to fight over but the ashes of their own house." "Prepare the horses," Perdiccas commanded, his eyes returning to the south. "If the brothers wish to play at war, we shall arrive to teach them how it is truly performed." To be continued in episode 47, Living Pledge. A Great Argead Saga ALEXEIN. Volume 1, Telesias, the War Dance. A new episode every single day. We are dropping a new episode every day until the epic conclusion of Volume 1. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 5 to 15-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Telesias playlist. Subscribe to follow the rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below.